We are back on Morningline. Thanks for joining us, talking about what's happening, of course, over the past 48 hours, but of course over the past 20 years in Afghanistan, as the U.S. now is officially out. The Taliban appears to be officially in. With us this morning is Professor Thomas Schwartz over at Vanderbilt. Really good to have him on with us. And Professor, we had some folks that called in during the last segment, waited through the break, and so I don't like to keep them waiting too much longer. So let's go and take Rodney first, and we're open to folks' thoughts on where things stand. Good morning, Rodney.
Hey.
Hey, what's on your mind?
Well, I enjoy watching you, Nick. But I wish you wouldn't, when you tell about the people that you talk with and everything about part of it being on Biden, part of it being on Trump. Yeah, Trump started negotiations and talk, but he had pretty stringent stipulations, and everybody fails to mention that when they say Trump did this, Trump did that, but they fail to add in there, Trump had stipulations on what he was doing.
What do you mean? Give me a stipulation.
Well, he had, I knew you was going to say that.
Well, I mean, you should have the stipulations if you're going to point to them.
I should have, but I didn't realize Anyway, Trump had stipulations. You can go back and find them yourself. But be fair about it. Trump had stipulations. This is all on Biden.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, again, it gets political. And I think you made a very good point that the professor did, that, look, the former President Trump had a lot of policies in place that Biden just totally ignored and blew off, and he gets this one. So there's no one disputing, and I agree with you here, Rodney. I mean, he's the president now, so this is on him, right? No one's saying that this is Trump's fault. I mean, but I'm just making the point that it's not as though Trump or Obama before him, right, Professor, were like, oh, let's stay in Afghanistan. This is great. They all were on the thinking of, yeah, at some point this has to end. And clearly the president reached an agreement, maybe with whatever stipulations he's talking about, though he couldn't give me any of them, that was in place. But ultimately, yeah, this was Biden's call. Correct, Professor? I mean, I'm making no bones about that.
Absolutely, but I think that the caller is correct. That the Trump administration actually did say that the withdrawal would be conditions-based. And one thing about the Biden decision was it was simply based on a date. It wasn't based on conditions on the ground, which I think was a mistake.
Sure.
That the Taliban violated the agreement, and so it could have been easily dispensed with because the Taliban had broken it. And the idea that we had to adhere to it, which is what Biden said yesterday, or effectively said yesterday during his speech, was simply wrong.
And yeah, if you would then, because he wasn't able to give it, but stipulations, which I assume the stipulations would be as we pull out, we have an agreement with the Taliban, that they'll work with what we have in place. And again, anyone who thinks that you're going to trust the Taliban on any agreement needs to have their head examined, okay? That just, I don't even know why we're thinking about trying to make an agreement with the Taliban. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, there were people who actually did. I mean, this is not.
I'm not going to buy anything they sell. I'm not going to believe anything they say.
Well, yeah, I think it was extraordinarily naive. But we were negotiating with them in Oman, in these neutral third-party countries. We had an ongoing negotiation, and we had this agreement with Taliban officials, and so. The Trump administration actually did proclaim that this agreement was made, and we would carry it out if the Taliban met the conditions. Problem is, the Taliban didn't observe it. That's the issue.
Right, which means whether Trump had been reelected or Biden in this case, it appeared as though either one of them could have not moved forward with this plan. You assume if. You know, you could have moved forward and then they renege on it, but it's possible it wouldn't have happened. Who knows what would have happened if President Trump was in office. But Biden apparently, did not have anything in place. It was interesting to me, though. You know, so one of the other images we saw was of the Taliban, you know, in the office there at the desk.
Yes.
And as I looked at that, I just kind of thought, them thinking to themselves, wow, that was easy. What do we do now? I mean, seriously, that's just what struck me. They just looked out of place in there, but almost like, wow, here we are. And what do we do? And I guess that's what's next. I mean, you saw images of, merchants out in front of beauty parlors and the like, taking down posters of women, who are not having their faces covered, and other questions about what will happen primarily to women in that kind of society under the Taliban, and what happens to some of these other folks that live there that clearly were so desperate to get out they were grabbing onto C-130s. What does it mean for them?
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think they see, as I think anyone with a clear eye and not projecting, they see the Taliban as a murderous group of thugs who use Islamic preachings and teachings as an excuse to carry out awful, brutal behavior toward women, toward anyone who they consider Western or modern. And this is a terrible. These are not nice people you can negotiate with. I find this element. I think our leaders have been really deluding themselves on this.
Let's take a call from Michael. Michael, good morning. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Nick. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, excuse me. I got to clear my voice. I was watching you on TV here, and I live in the Fort Campbell area around Clarksville. And you was asking what you thought the American people thought about this. And as a son of a veteran, my dad died from Agent Orange after Vietnam and all. And so I had some time to spend with him talking about it all. And it kind of feels like Vietnam again. I mean, it feels like a loss to me. I mean, we have spent 20 years there, and a lot of American blood has been shed there. I work on Harleys in this town, and a lot of these veterans come back, and Harley has a deal with them where they get bikes at cost if they served overseas and all that. Well, they come in, and a lot of them are burned up. I mean, they're blowed up from IEDs. And it's kind of hard to look at, especially with the history that my family has with war. And a lot of guys were getting drafted back then, but my dad joined because he felt like it was the right humanitarian thing to do for the people of South Vietnam. And now we went over there to fight terrorism, and we made a lot of promises to these people. And now they're hanging on the sides of airplanes.
Yeah.
And it shakes me to my core, Nick.
I hear you. I was wondering, I'm so glad you called, because I was talking to someone else too, not just about the people that are left behind and maybe feel as though they've been abandoned, but I was wondering, Michael, from your perspective too, after your father served in Vietnam and then in this situation, if you're a soldier that's back here now, some of those who come in and buy Harleys and maybe lost a limb or have been burned, and you look at this and you wonder, I would think maybe, gosh, the sacrifice, and what was it for?
Well, it was in vain at this point.
Yeah,
and that's
hard.
What
that's
hurts
hard.
The most.
Right.
Like when my father was serving, I think President Johnson finally let him shoot back. He had a encampment that was along the Cambodian border, and they was using the Ho Chi Minh Trail to go across into Cambodia and shoot at my father. And they weren't allowed to shoot back forever, but it was politics. And now I hear that Biden wants them all out so he can have a celebration on the 20th anniversary of this. And I look at these people, and I see them every day, Nick. I mean, I see them every day.
Sure.
And then I see these people, and I guarantee you that they feel, think about how they feel about the people who didn't make it back.
Yeah, and that's...
And think about their parents and their brothers and their sisters, how they feel when they see these people that their son or their daughter died for, to try to liberate and help after we went over there for different reasons. I mean, look, at 9/11, Nick, I was ready to join myself. And my father made me promise on his deathbed that I would never join the armed forces. His words were, "They don't love you, son." Yeah.
Wow.
My grandfather was really, really rich on my dad's side. I came from a split home. My parents split up early. My dad had major problems after the war, but anyhow, my grandfather had to pay for his health care. The VA in Redlands in California was just going to let him die. They said there's nothing we can do for him. Well, he lived 11 more years after my grandfather paid for his health care. And I think that's what my father meant by it, that he felt abandoned even by our own country. And I see that a lot around here too. And now these guys are having to look at themselves in the mirror, and they don't have a nose no more.
Yeah.
And they got blown up over there outside of, or inside Afghanistan, you know, fighting these wars for the last 20 years. And to me, it feels like a loss.
Yeah.
When I see people wanting out of there so bad that they would fall off of an airplane to their death, I mean, first of all, they couldn't take the altitude. They'd die even if they could hang on.
Of course.
I mean, you know, it's a sad time for me. And I actually like Biden. I didn't have nothing against Trump. I actually didn't vote for Trump or anybody else. I hadn't voted the last couple of times. But, you know, since I turned 18, I voted, and I always voted for the guy I thought was right.
Sure.
You know, Republican or Democrat, I voted for John McCain. He didn't get in there, you know.
Sure.
But anyways.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate him calling and maybe comment a bit on this. He's absolutely right. Whether it's Desert Storm, you know, Iraq, and some of these conflicts, you can debate whether or not we should have just left Afghanistan after bin Laden was taken out as opposed to staying. And none of what he's talking about, but we end up staying, and then it's always these soldiers. I mean, they don't make the policy decisions. They're sent, and they follow orders, and they go. And they hope what they're sacrificing is worth something. And I'm not saying what they did here wasn't. But then they see a pullout like this, and it's kind of back to where it was 20 years ago, and you wonder, what was it all about? And you can say, well, we shouldn't have been there all that time. Maybe we should have pulled out. And the question is, what's the end game, though? I mean, how long? You know, Biden did this now. If he didn't, are we going to stay for another 20 years? Are we going to make that commitment? But against that whole backdrop, it's these poor soldiers that go and serve, and you know, you can debate whether it was right or wrong to be there that long, but gosh, you can't debate their sacrifice. And I know a lot of them are feeling that right now.
No, and there's very little to be able to be said. They suffered and died in many respects for a cause that looks now like it has been defeated. And that was also the case when the communists took over South Vietnam. So these are defeats. You know, there's a famous line that President Nixon at one point said, "I'm not going to be the first American president to lose a war." And, you know, this idea that the United States, American exceptionalism, we don't lose our wars, we win our wars. I think this is damaging to many people's belief in America and into the cause that they fought for. And there's not a lot to be said. I do think, and H.R. McMaster, who served in Afghanistan and was Trump's first national security advisor, made the point today that if he were speaking to veterans and he had served in Afghanistan, he'd say, you did accomplish something. I mean, you did, after 9/11, prevent Afghanistan from becoming a source for new terror attacks. You did get bin Laden, all of that. But that may seem very hollow as a justification.
Sure, and why not just leave after you took out bin Laden?
Well, at that point, Afghanistan was still unstable. And there was, after the killing of bin Laden, I think President Obama wanted to leave, but he didn't want the same type of disaster that we've seen with just in the last few days to happen on his watch. And it was, keep in mind, Nick, that even at the height, it was never as costly a war as Vietnam. You also have a volunteer military. You don't have a draft call. So you don't have that element of domestic unrest. Remember also that in the 2008 campaign, Obama called Afghanistan the good war as opposed to Iraq the bad war. And Obama got out of Iraq and then ended up having to go back in because the terrorists got back there. But in that sense, he wasn't in a hurry to get out of Afghanistan after the bin Laden. He did start to feel that in the second term that he wanted out, and he did announce that we had gone to a non-combat mode. But he wasn't in a hurry to get out.
On that note, we'll take a break. When we come back, more calls. Tom and others, your thoughts, and I appreciate Michael and Rodney calling in. We'll take more of those with the professor right after this. Stay with us.